Started. I'm so glad that you all are here with us today. My name is Jeremy Arnold. I'm the new National Organizing Manager at the Secular Student Alliance. And I'm really pleased to be able to present to you Mr. Anthony Magnabosco, who is a leading theoretician and practitioner of street epistemology. Anthony is a skeptic and an atheist from San Antonio, and he's been practicing and promoting street epistemology since 2013. He's had a lot of exposure, on various platforms, especially YouTube, and has explored a lot of different topics, including gods, ghosts, karma, laws of attraction, a variety of social and political topics. You also may recognize him from some of your favorite podcasts. And he's also founder and the current executive director of the nonprofit organization Street Epistemology International. He's given dozens of talks and workshops on street epistemology, including this one that you're in right now. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Anthony to get us started in some of the basics of street epistemology.
All right, Jeremy, thank you so much for the introduction and welcome. I see a few familiar faces. Andy, I see you there. I'm glad that you're here. Miklas out of Denmark, he's given a few talks on street epistemology, and a few other friends, including a few people that I remember from the SSA here in San Antonio, Texas. So it's really good to see so many faces. I'll go ahead and share my screen. I want to spend about 30 minutes covering the basics of street epistemology, and then I'd like to take the rest of the time to answer your questions, because I found that that's usually the most interesting part of these discussions, is the questions that people have been wondering about, and this is your opportunity to ask those. So we'll get to that very quickly. I do see that we do have a chat in the Zoom. If you're unfamiliar with Zoom at this point, that is a place where you can type messages specifically to a person or to the entire group. We are recording this. The SSA may do something with this video. I don't know. It may end up on YouTube, so just keep that in mind and manage your cameras and microphones accordingly. All right. I want to talk about street epistemology here. Why not? I'm sure everyone can see that clearly, right? I'm just joking. You shouldn't be able to see that. If you could see that, I'd be really surprised. So in the talk today, I want to cover some of the basics of street epistemology. You may have been hearing this term. We were kind enough to get a name drop on the Joe Rogan podcast. Regardless of what you think of Joe Rogan, it was dropped on that podcast, and that was a big moment for us, but it's not the be-all, end-all. Talks like this, just getting the word out about what this approach is really useful. It's really important. And I want to show you the steps involved, if we can even consider them steps, because street epistemology is a conversation. It's a way of talking with people where you reveal the quality of the reasons and the methods that a person used to weight those reasons to be sure that something is true. But this is the basic introduction of street epistemology. We'll be learning what street epistemology is, why people might find it useful, and then get a rough understanding of how a conversation might go. And then, of course, the big part at the end is the Q&A. Just a couple words about the Secular Student Alliance and myself. This might be the 9th or 10th talk that I've given to the SSA over the years. Half of those have probably been in person here in San Antonio, and then maybe the other half of those online. So I've given many talks on this approach, and I really am quite fond of the Secular Student Alliance. I like what you all stand for and the things that you fight for. And I also think that SE complements the SSA really well. I've said this many times in my talks that, especially as college students, learning how to engage with people about sensitive topics is a great tool to have. But as you'll see in this talk, there are many, many other things that you can use this conversation tool called street epistemology for. And I think you will possibly have a leg up on your competition or other people or people from different tribes, perhaps even, if you are familiar with this approach. So the SSA, thank you so much for having me. Let's see here, a little bit about myself here. I don't usually talk about my family too much, but this is my family. This was taken a few years ago. My daughter is on her way to her second year of university. My son is finishing up his senior year, and I've got the best wife ever. I've been going out and practicing something called street epistemology. I would literally strap on a camera and go to a trail or a university. And I understand that that sounds weird. Admittedly, it is. I get that. However, I wanted to have experience applying this approach that seemingly is a better way of talking to people about difficult views. So I would go out with my whiteboard and my timer and initiate talks with strangers and then record those. You can see the camera there on my shirt, and then put them on my YouTube channel, which I think I have down here maybe. And then after I did that for a number of years, giving talks and so forth, it sort of dawned on me and a few other people who are into this that we need to sort of legitimize what we're doing. Let's start a nonprofit where we could find people to study this and see if it's effective. Is it helping? Is it hurting? Is it confusing? Is it helping people take another look at their views? So we formed this nonprofit organization called Street Epistemology International. So if you have a chance, check those out. Let's go back a little bit here. I want to start sort of at the beginning of this. And this probably even goes back even further, actually, now that I think about it. Like street epistemology, I like to describe as an offshoot of the Socratic method. And if you're familiar with that, it's essentially where this fellow purportedly named Socrates would engage with people in his town and ask them challenging questions. And as it turned out, apparently they weren't very fond of it, and it didn't turn out very well for him. But it was the precursor, I think, to this idea of street epistemology, which was first introduced to the world in this book called GASP, A Manual for Creating Atheists by Peter Boghossian. So I read this book in 2013, and the book basically talks about how there's a different way of engaging with people where you use questions to not find facts to show that they're mistaken, but to actually listen to them and hear them out, have them explain how they concluded that they're correct. And that is the premise, essentially, of street epistemology. It's not getting so wrapped up in the arguments that your opponent or somebody that you disagree with, or even a loved one who you just happen to not see eye to eye on something. We tend to spend a lot of our time arguing about the doctrine, if it's a religious thing, or some news article that came out. We spend a lot of time fighting amongst the leaves, these little exterior branches that don't really tend to impact a person profoundly. So with SE, what we're really interested in, and I'm going to break this down even further, but we're interested in not what the person thinks is true per se, like we're interested in that a little bit, but it's primarily the quality of the reasons that they think that they have for thinking something is true to a fairly high degree of confidence. If you've watched any SE videos, you've probably noticed that we usually say, like, on a scale from 0 to 100, how sure are you that this is true? And then we like to drill down. We want to get to the roots. We want to figure out what's really holding all of this up. And that's a very big part of SE. So the book started, that's the premise. And then what was really interesting, what kind of happened here was that people started forming various communities in Facebook and Reddit and so forth. Discord wasn't around back then, but Discord's really jumping these days. So check that out if you want. But a community basically formed of people that understood the principles of the book, and they were watching the videos, and we started developing it even further, learning from our mistakes, listening to the best information out there regarding psychotherapy and other disciplines to see how can we make this method of communication even better. Now, a few years later, I think in 2019, a second book was released called How to Have Impossible Conversations. I would say that this book obviously follows the first book, but I would say that this is probably the most current and up-to-date version so far, if you want to get a better understanding of what it is we're doing. And then we're currently developing this course. All right, so this course I'm really excited about. We have volunteers from around the world trying to codify what street epistemology is, which is really challenging. because lots of people have lots of ideas about what SE is, and who are we to say what SE is? But we felt that somebody needed to kind of step up and put some guidelines down as far as what this method of exploration of people's beliefs are. So there is a course being worked on at the moment. We're hoping to get, maybe, I would say, a third of the way done with the course before the end of this year, then hopefully the second, the remaining 2/3 by the end of next year. That'd be great. All right. I want to talk a little bit about what SE can be used for. I get this a lot, and I tend to forget mentioning this in my talks, but a lot of people ask me, well, why are you interested in this? Why are you getting it? What do you find so interesting about this, and why do you think other people should learn it? So I want to spend a little bit of time on it. All you have to do is really just look around and see what's happening in the world today. We're talking past each other. There's this big dilemma of how do we figure out what is actually true, and how do we align our beliefs, or at least our confidence in our beliefs, as responsibly as possible. And that's what drew me to SE many, many years ago. Also, the idea that I could use this approach to engage with theists, to challenge them about why they think God is real. So admittedly, that was a very big draw for me. And to this day, I think it's a big strength of SE. I think SE excels in helping people take another look at their supernatural claims, which are represented here. And it's ultimately about, I think, getting people or helping people recognize that maybe they're a little bit too confident in their view than they have reasons to support. And that discovery on their own, by us engaging in a dialogue, can be really useful in helping them reconsider that and ponder it. Like, do I have good reasons for thinking that this is true? What's a more responsible position to be at in my level of confidence that this is true? But SE did start off with a focus on religion. I want to define epistemology really quick. I kind of forgot to do that, but epistemology is the study of knowledge, which in hindsight, I think is a bit of a misnomer, because we're not interested in what you know. We're interested in what you think you know to a high degree of confidence. So street epistemology is largely about identifying our confidence level, as opposed and assessing, are we really confident? Are we overconfident? As opposed to saying, well, that's factually true or not. A big premise also in the book that started this was that when you start asking people, especially religious people, why they think that their views are true, the method that they're using to verify the quality of their reasons seems to come down to faith. And the author purported that faith is an unreliable epistemology. It's not a good epistemology if you value truth. So a lot of people who initially got into SE, we glommed onto that big time. Like, that was a big draw for us. But you can use it for all different types of supernatural claims. There was one example where a friend was telling me that he was observing the SSA booth, and somebody walked up to the booth and said, I don't believe in any gods, but I think that there's a pagan goddess out there that's protecting me. And somebody at the table said, well, that's bullshit. And it shut the conversation down almost immediately. And I'm hoping that you'll learn this tool so that when you find yourself in situations where people do make claims, that you can engage with them in a more responsible way, where it doesn't shut them down, but it opens them up and it helps them think about their views a little bit. You can also use it for, like, wishing on a star, more benign supernatural beliefs. SE honestly is quite powerful when you're exploring supernatural claims, but you can also use it for other types of claims as well. I don't go out and record conversations anymore. I'm too busy with the nonprofit and developing the course and all sorts of other stuff. But I've used street epistemology to explore social issues, racism, transgender rights, gun control. Lately, a big issue of this day is vaccine mandates and vaccines. Should we be taking vaccines? What about the vaccine hesitant? How do we reach these folks? And here's the cool thing about SE. it doesn't matter where you stand on these claims. You can use this tool with people who make the opposite view. It's very useful for that. I've even used it to explore career options with people, with students. Like, oh yeah, I was really thinking about getting into accounting, but I'm not really sure if that's the case. Well, I can use questions to help them reconsider why they were thinking about getting it into the first place, and if they have good reasons for getting into that. We can also see it in politics. I was trying to find a slide for politics. This was about the best that I can do. And then I was thinking, like, here's a good way of thinking about SE. Let's say that you have a family, or you're babysitting somebody, and your child's worried that there's a monster under the bed. We don't usually say, well, just get back in bed, there's nothing to worry about. We usually engage with them in a gentle, respectful, patient way. And that's the kind of attitude that I think really will serve you well. It's not hard to learn street epistemology and ask the questions, but if you don't have the right attitude, the questions won't land very well. You'll end up upsetting people. So there's a little work that you need to do before you even get into the conversation. And that's why I want to introduce to you the conversation arc. At the risk of making it seem like all you need to do is just follow these simple steps, and you're going to have a profound conversation where people are changing their minds left and right. It doesn't usually work that way. At the very least, you're going to probably have a better understanding of their position. They'll have a better understanding of their own position, and they may even adjust their confidence or seek better reasons to keep thinking that something is true. But this conversation arc essentially starts with, in my view, figuring out what your goals are. What do you hope to achieve from having this conversation in the first place? Why are you motivated to have this talk? Do you want to change a person's mind? Do you want to better understand them? Do you want to, are you hoping that they'll back off of their certainty on some specific claim? Your goals can vary at the start, in the middle of a conversation, and at the end. It's really interesting. And it's not just like you have one or two goals. You can have 5, 10 goals, and those could be fluctuating throughout the conversation. But what we're finding is that it's really useful to have a dialogue with yourself and ask yourself what you're hoping to achieve. Very, very important. The other thing I wanted to hit on is this attitude that I think is really necessary. And I have a few Star Wars characters here. If you think of C-3PO, he's always kind of panicked and flailing his arms around and just kind of losing his cool. Whereas with R2-D2, very chill, very methodical, and paying close attention to what's going on. It's probably better to have the latter than the former. Now, you can still engage with somebody where you're jumping around and everything, but if you have the ability to slow yourself down, take your ego out of it, try to make it about your conversation partner. If you walk into your dialogue where you're attempting to use some of the tools of SE, staying calm and focused and keeping your ego out of it as much as possible. Try to remind yourself, perhaps, if you are a humanist or like the better qualities of your nature, try to focus on that. The other thing that's sort of the next step of this, I think, is to establish a little bit of rapport. Once you've identified your goals and you've had a dialogue with yourself, is ask yourself, like, how can this conversation go better? What would I want if I was on the receiving end of this conversation? And a little chit chat at the start can really help. If this is a stranger, or maybe you're at a rally, or maybe you're you're tabling for the SSA, you want to build a little bit of rapport, figure out the person's name, why they're going to school, what they might be studying, that type of thing. But keep it genuine. You don't want to just be fake and have like fake questions. Only ask questions during this rapport building phase that you're genuinely interested in understanding, and be open to answering questions in return. Another big part of this phase here, this building and maintaining rapport, we found, is obtaining informed consent. Ask your conversation partner if they are willing to explore one of their beliefs. Maybe in the rapport building stage here, they've revealed something, or you're at a protest and it's obvious what the topic is. it's still helpful to ask them, would you mind if I asked you a few questions to explore why you think that this is true? And I want to, you can even go further, because they may say, well, what do you have in mind? They may be a little guarded, a little suspicious. You can keep revealing more and more about what you're attempting to do until you hit their level of comfort. And then you probably also want to revisit this too. You can always revisit rapport and maybe even come back to it if you feel like things are getting a little heated. This is a really nice starting point and a point to keep touching back on if you feel like things are not going very well. Probably next on this, what are we calling this here? The conversation arc is the identification of the claim. Now, sometimes you may be in a conversation with somebody and they've made 10 claims. Well, how do you know which one to focus on? You really can't go after all of them, but it could be really useful to say, I know you've mentioned a couple of things here. Which claim do you think we can explore together with me asking you these questions in this manner called street epistemology? You could literally just ask that and pay attention to what they're saying. Work out the definition of words too. So sometimes they may use a word like God or what's another word? Vaccine even could be different, or poison, like that vaccine's poison, you shouldn't be taking it. That would be a good word to define. What exactly do you mean by poison? You might be surprised by the definition. So clarify the claim, work out your definitions, and encourage them also to do the same back to you. If I say a word and you don't understand what it means, please bring that to my attention, because I want to make sure that you're understanding what I'm saying and vice versa. This is probably one of the most noticeable things about street epistemology that you may have seen in the videos, is that we try to ask our conversation partner, how sure are you? What is the sense or this feeling that you have of certainty that you're correct, that this idea that you have in your mind is factually true? Can we put it on a scale? This is optional. It's subjective. Sometimes the number that a person gives may not be the most accurate number that represents their position. So they may say, yeah, I'm about 90% sure that there's a higher power, when in reality, they may be at a 50. They may have been at a 50 and didn't realize it, or maybe they realized it and didn't feel like telling you that they were that low on the level of their confidence that this is true. But it's just a starting point, and it could be a finishing point too. I think early on, back in the day when we were doing SE, in particular myself, I was interested in like, where are you in terms of your confidence now? And then at the end of the conversation, I would ask them again, like, how sure are you now? Because I wanted to see if there was any fluctuation. Did this conversation have any impact? And what we've learned is that the impact of an SE talk could be way more than just confidence. It could be clarity. It could be understanding that maybe the reason that I led with isn't the best reason. I better figure that one out. And from now on, I'm going to use this other reason. So it can make people be a little bit more careful about the reasons that they surface. And there's tons of other benefits as well. All right. What comes next here? Yeah. So generally, after we've identified a confidence level, we generally ask a person for their most influential reason. And I love this image of the Jenga tower. I've used this in one of my videos once called How Minds Change, where it shows this Jenga tower. So if you picture your beliefs or a belief that you have, and then there's all these supporting reasons, in street epistemology, what we try to do is figure out, well, what reason do you have that makes you the most confident that your claim is factually true? And we try to, with them, this picture isn't perfect because there's only one hand pulling it out, but it's a joint effort. Let's pull this piece out together, inspect it, and see if it belongs in there. And if not, maybe set it over here in this other pile, like, I need to get back to that. Let me revisit that one to see, does it belong in the stack? Maybe it doesn't belong down that low, but maybe up a little higher. So figure out the reason why a person thinks that something is true. Another word for reason, by the way, you can think of it in terms of a support or a factor or evidence or a justification. Just a few different words that we found could be useful. Oh, here's a little pro tip too. When somebody gives you a reason for why they think something is true to a high degree of confidence, double check. Don't just assume. And a good rule of thumb is to ask the person, would you be just as sure that your fact claim was true if you didn't have this reason? And then allow them time to process it. And half the time, the person will say no. I'd be just as sure that this is true without this reason. It's probably not a reason that's worth the time to explore. We want to figure out what reasons are contributing to a person's certainty. So do that little check. This next these two little ones here, I guess, are probably the biggest part of the street epistemology. In SE, we want to take that reason and then work with you by us asking questions. Well, how did you decide to weight that reason the way that you did? I know that I showed a Jenga tower, but another way of thinking about this is a pie chart of sorts. I understand that humans don't really think about their beliefs and their reasons in this manner, but it could be helpful to think about quantifying your reason and why does that reason that I have so much weight? How did that even get in there? Why is it still there? It's the identification of the weighting process that somebody is using that we're really interested in. And there are some other factors here. Let's be real, right? Like somebody may say, well, I think God is real because it says so in this holy book. When you start peeling back the reasons, the real reasons, very often, especially for supernatural ones, there are psychological and social reasons for it. I love being part of the club. I meet my friends. I got a loan on my house because I knew the guy from my religious institution that I go to, and so forth. There are also psychological needs. And it's hard. Many people don't lead with this, by the way. They'll usually give evidential-based reasons for why they think something is true, but always lurking there below the surface are these psychosocial reasons. Well, I guess when it comes down to it, it's nice to think that I'm going to see my loved ones again. So be prepared for those types of reasons too. Okay. I got about 4 more minutes and then we'll 4 more minutes and then we'll shift to the Q&A. Here's the biggest part of it though. Like this is really the epistemology part of it as far as I'm concerned. It's how did you figure out that I should weight that reason to that degree of confidence? What test did you use? Did you even use a test? Can you talk me through it? Now, this is usually where we get into how types of questions, like how did you test this? How did you determine that that's a good reason? Many people, I think, don't really test their reasons. So it's okay. Like this is still a fair question because even if they've never tested their reasons to determine how much weight it should get, these conversations can help people thinking in that way. So thinking about it afterwards, I wonder how I could test to see if that's a good reason. Like if I really think ghosts are real and my reason is because I hear footsteps down the hallway, how can I test what I'm hearing to be sure that my conclusion is correct? Helping people consider tests to verify the weight that they're putting on reasons is a large part of SE. But you just can't jump to that, really. You have to build rapport. You have to identify the claim and so forth. And then we don't usually take that moment of vulnerability that people can be in this phase when maybe they realize, oh man, I got this reason for this very important belief. And I don't know if I have a good way of telling if it's true or not. It could be really upsetting to people. So pay close attention to that. Try to end your conversation before people get too overwhelmed, before they get upset. And then end on friendly terms so that they will likely want to meet with you again or reach out to you, as has happened with myself, if they're struggling with the conversation that they've had with you. And then this is really where the best part of SE happens, is long after the conversation's over, when the person is thinking about their talk, hopefully. Now, you may run into people who never give your talk a second thought. That could happen. But if they run into somebody else, maybe down the road, who understands what SE is, street epistemology, and engages with them, it might start sparking those introspective thoughts. How can I be so sure that these things are true? What would my life be like if I didn't think that this was true? What kind of impact are we talking about? Would I have to find new friends? Would I get kicked out of the house? These are really important questions that only your conversation partner can answer. You really can't answer them for them, but you can be there for them. And sometimes this reflection process will kind of start things over. They might come back to you and say, "Yeah, I've got a better reason now. Can you engage with me again and ask me these questions?" And you can certainly do that. And I've got one more minute of my 30 minutes that I was planning. This is awesome. Okay. And so I want to just plug the second session before we get to the Q&A. In the second session that we'll be doing a week from today, I want to actually show you a street epistemology example, and we're going to critique it. Now that you have a rough sense of what the conversation arc is like, watching a conversation next week, unfortunately, or you can go to YouTube and do a search for street epistemology in your favorite topic. You'll find examples, and you'll probably notice things that are happening like, oh, this is that rapport building phase that I heard Anthony talking about. But next week, I want to go over some of the ethical challenges that come up, or what happens when you encounter resistance. How do you get beyond that? And then, of course, we'll do another Q&A there as well. So I'll be stopping the share pretty soon, but I do want to get into the Q&A. We're coming right down to 30 minutes. Perfect. I love it. All right, let's get into the Q&A. And I'm not exactly sure, Jeremy, what might be the best way to do this, other than maybe ask people to type their questions in the chat from this point on. And here's the thing, I want to answer as many questions as possible. So as soon as I see a question, I'm going to try to answer it really quickly. If I see something interesting that I missed, I'm going to go back to it. But maybe what you can do is, if you notice that I'm answering a question, hold off on typing yours. But as soon as you get the sense that I'm wrapping my question up, then you can type your question. Would that be cool? Okay. I hope I'm getting some questions. I'm not seeing any. Okay. What research has been done looking at the effectiveness harms of SE? Great question. At the moment, other than the anecdotal experiences that we've had out in the field or people using this, there's no data whatsoever behind the effectiveness of SE. But because we formed the nonprofit, I think we've sort of legitimized SE in the minds of a lot of people who are interested in this stuff. And we've been contacted by 3 academics who are interested in studying SE, and a 4th person who's interested in introducing us to more people who want to study this. So at the moment, there are no studies, there's no long-term studies. SE may be completely ineffective, but I have to tell you, everything that I've seen as a practitioner and talking with people who are using it, they find that their conversations are way better. They have a much better understanding of who they're speaking with. And it tends to actually, I think, improve the practitioner, the person who's using SE. I found it like I'm a lot less triggered when I run into somebody who I vehemently disagree with. I can see them as a person who's holding a belief that they probably never had anyone explore with them in this manner. So I almost like by default give people a pass, and that calms me down. And now I'm in a position where I'm willing to like invite them and talk with them about this stuff. So that's a great question. Has anyone ever done SE with you? All the time. When you're in the SE community, you can't make any claim whatsoever with somebody asking, how sure are you? Why do you think that that's true? What would change your mind? So it happens all the time. I've had a few people use SE with me about abortion and gun control and voting, God, my atheism, you name the topic, people have used SE with me about it. What format would this course be, asks John. What format would this course be provided? University classrooms, like an anthropology? Or okay. At the moment, the course that we're working on is a self-directed one, meaning you'll likely go to a website, you'll pull up whatever module you want to take, and you'll go through it. The second phase of that will be to make a web app type of form, or a web app where you can track your progress and so forth. Right now, we're writing the content for the course, but we're hopeful that there will be people who can take that content and turn it into instructor-led courses. That's where we want to go with this. We want people to take this and start teaching it in middle school, grade school, high school, university. So yes, ultimately. And by the way, thank you guys for pacing your questions. That's really great. I appreciate that. Has SE ever been used for tenant organizing? I don't know what that is. Tenant organizing? Is that like with you if you're renting an apartment or something? Is that what that is? I don't know. No, not to my knowledge. I'll just answer that. Which should be considered more important to street epistemologists, getting people to think why they believe the way they do or changing their minds? In other words, if you're engaging with somebody and they walk away not willing to listen or to consider, oops, I just lost it. Where is it? I should copy and paste these because it's hard to scroll. Oh, I can make my window a little larger. That'll be easier. In other words, if you're engaging with somebody and they walk away not willing to listen or consider the possibility that they could be wrong, do you consider the conversation a failure? Okay, so you're asking about goals or what I would consider a success. When I first started, changing the person's mind was my first goal. Until you start to realize that beliefs are so important to people's identity that people need time to process this. So it would almost be unethical, I think, if there was a way to just talk to somebody and they immediately stop believing what they believed. I want a person to really process the conversation that we had and decide where to go on their own at their own speed. So my primary goal now when I'm talking to somebody on any claim is, do I have a better understanding of their reasoning? And do they also have a better understanding of their own reasoning? That's a huge goal for me, because think about it, like once you have a better understanding or clarity into your thought process, if you value truth and you want to believe true things and believing true things is important to you, people tend to, I think, go there on their own. Now, there may be costs. We talked about that a little bit. Some people aren't willing to pay the costs, the social costs or the psychological cost of letting go a deeply held belief, but that's on their own. I don't think I could have an SE conversation where I would look back and say it was a failure. I'm getting ready to upload 5 discussions with a childhood friend's mom. She's very dug in. She's 77 years old. We did it over Zoom. And unfortunately, I guess at the end of it, she's like, I'm just as sure that this is true. And, you know, part of me was like disappointed, but also like, I thought it was still useful. I have a much better understanding of where she stands. I think she does too. There were arguments that she raised that I don't think she'll ever raise them again going forward. She's now on a mission to find better reasons for thinking that her belief is true. And maybe that's what's needed in the interim for her to really process the bigger claims that we explored. When people don't value truth, do you tend to just switch to a purely curious mindset, asks Brendan, or how do you think about the conversation goals? Valuing truth. So, okay, so let's take a step back. Sometimes in the conversation, people will reveal that it's not important to them if they don't have good reasons for thinking that this is true. And it's a little shocking when people say that. It was shocking when I heard it the first couple times. And at first I was like, I don't think that are they really being honest? And in some cases they were, but in most cases they weren't. They were making an exception for specific beliefs being true. Generally, they put their seatbelt on. They want to make sure they put the right gas in their car. They lock their doors at night. They're interacting with reality in a way that shows that they do value truth, but they're making exceptions for some claims like God claims or supernatural ones or the political views or whatever. That's what I find more interesting. So you can have a 20-minute or an hour-long discussion simply about their truth valuation. Why do they value truth in this instance, but in this instance, on this claim that seems really important to them, truth isn't a factor? So you could be talking about what might be different there. And that's usually when better reasons come up or their psychosocial motivations will come forward. But it's a little frustrating when you meet people who just lead with that. Like, I don't even care what's true or not. Well, you must to some degree. You have clothes on, right? Like we're talking, you've learned English. You must value truth to some degree. How do you deal with interlocutors or conversation partners who refuse to make any concrete claims that they're willing to commit to? That's really tough. I'm thinking about conspiracy theorists who just ask a lot of leading questions, intending to sow doubt or cynicism. Yeah, I sort of dubbed this the shotgun approach, where someone will just hit you with claim after claim after claim, and you don't know where to go. And especially I've noticed this with conspiratorial minded people. I think it's interesting that you mentioned them as well. we're all kind of conspiratorial minded to some degree, right? It's just the degree. So there's some threshold at one point, at some point where it's like, you're really into these conspiracies. What I tend to do is say, okay, you've mentioned 10 conspiracies or 10 claims. I'd like to focus on one of them, but if you don't want to, or you're incapable of doing it, you can just be really blunt. Like, I've listened to you, I've attempted to narrow this down to one claim, and I'm really struggling to do it. Like, maybe we should take a step back. Let's take a step back and walk me through your process on how you decide what claims you accept and what claims you reject. Let's talk really broadly about it. What do you consider evidence? What do you need to see to change your mind? Do you need better evidence? Do you change your mind for other reasons? So now you're not even talking about these myriad of claims that a person has, but you're just talking about how they form beliefs in a broader sense. And sometimes in that process, they'll reveal a claim to help explain how they're deciding which belief to believe or not. And then you can table that and say, like, that thing about 9/11 and it being a big hoax or something, or a government conspiracy, that might be the claim that we focus on once we go from broad to narrow. Are there any academic basis currently to draw from, as in scholarly literature in regards to epistemics? Yeah, there's a whole field called motivational interviewing. It's a psychotherapy technique. There's also something called cognitive behavioral therapy, and a few other disciplines in the psychotherapy realm that tend to overlap. As part of the course we're putting together, I'm working on module 1, which is what is street epistemology, and we're trying to show how SE overlaps psychotherapy and how it's different. And we're noticing that many of the things that are being covered in psychotherapy and neurology, they're noticing things that we're running into when we're engaging with people. This idea of protecting a cherished belief and being biased in the reasons that will allow to affect our confidence or not. So yes, we do try to follow the science on that, but I gotta say, like, there's sort of like a rogue nature to SE at this point. We just have people who are using these tools, essentially having conversations and then giving the community feedback. Like, when I asked this question this way, it really seemed to leave a profound impact on the person. Like, what do you think is going on there? So there's this professional academic discipline looking into how beliefs are formed and how views are changed and so forth. And then there's this sort of like rogue street. That's the street part of street epistemology. It's like this layman version. It doesn't mean going out on the street, but like just having talks with people and listening to what they have to say and looking at the literature and trying to follow the guidance a little bit, but experimenting and trying to have better talks with people. All right. Thank you, Nicholas. Appreciate that. Do you find that some SE respondents assume an unintended motive behind your questions? And if so, how do you deal with that? Absolutely. I'd be surprised if I initiated a talk with somebody where they weren't suspicious, because if you see my videos, I have a whiteboard and I'm flagging somebody down. I ask if I can record them. Very, very few people do that version of SE. Most people wait. But even if you see an opportunity to use SE, or somebody puts you in a position where you could possibly use SE, they will almost immediately know or notice that you're engaging with them differently than most people normally do. So like the alarm bells will be going off, like, why is he asking me these 3 questions and nodding and like scratching his chin? He doesn't do that normally. Why is he suddenly doing it now? So one thing that I would recommend is ask somebody if you can use a different approach with them on the claim that they made. That way, they're more informed about what's going on. And when they notice differences or oddities, let's just put it that way, they will be prepared for it, because you don't want to startle your conversation partner with weird questions. You want to prepare them for it. And you can also, if they assume, they're likely going to assume like they might be asking me these questions because they don't think it's true. Here's the interesting thing. Usually when I use SE, I tend not to reveal my position unless they want to hear it. sometimes I'll offer and they say, well, no, I don't want to hear it. If they do, I tell them. But many times at the end of a discussion, they don't know where I stand. I look at that as a good thing. Like, that probably is an indication that I was neutral on it, that they couldn't detect where I stood on the claim, because I'm worried about revealing my position, whether I agree with them or not, by the way, that revelation could sway them one way or the other. And I don't want to do that. But there's nothing wrong with saying, yeah, I'd love to talk with you about why you're at this vaccine protest, or why you're planning to vote for that candidate, or why you won't accept the election results in California. I'm actually, like, right before I started this presentation, I'm chatting with somebody on a YouTube video. I'm using SE with them. Do you mind if I ask you some questions about this? So you can reveal your stance on their claim at any point. There's nothing wrong with that. And you might be surprised. It doesn't always mean that they'll become more guarded. I've actually had people open up even more when they've learned where I stood, because maybe they've always wanted to speak with somebody who had my view or whatever. When doing street epistemology, I noticed you speak with students from various religious backgrounds. For instance, you once interviewed a Mohammed who denied evolution because of the Quran. Yeah, that was early. That was like 2015. What is your approach for those? Oh, here's the thing. So let me finish the question. What is your approach for those who aren't from a Muslim background? Do you believe reading Hadith or the Quran helps? One of the biggest mistakes that I made at the start was, I thought, if I want to talk to a specific religious demographic, I need to be really well versed in what they believe. So I was buying Bibles and the Book of Mormon and the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita, because I was really focused on religious views at the start. Never cracked them. And then I realized I didn't need to, because the people that I'm speaking with have read it and they became convinced. And when you're using street epistemology, you want to understand how they became convinced. You don't want to encourage them to give you reasons that, I don't want to ask my conversation partner for reasons that I'll find convincing. And many times they think that that's what they should be doing. So I have to, like, hey, by the way, like, don't give me reasons that you think I'll find convincing. I want to understand how you became convinced. Can we explore those? So you don't really have to know anything about these religious backgrounds or whatever. It really kind of takes the pressure off of you. Actually, you don't need to study. Like, the more, I've said this before and people like roll their eyes at it, but like, I think it's true. The more ignorant you are on their claim, the better it is, because you're going to be asking basic questions that they may never even considered. And that will be helpful in the end. How are we on time, Jeremy? Oh, maybe 10 more minutes?
We got 10 minutes, yeah.
Okay. How does one decide whether or not to initiate a street epistemology interaction with another person? Great. Does there need to be a clear agreement between both parties before SE begins? No, I mean, there are no hard and fast rules. The SE police aren't going to come knocking on your door if you don't ask for permission or consent or agreement. Sometimes you don't even know that you're going to be having an SE conversation until it just like dawns on you. I've been talking to this person for 30 minutes. Why am I not using this other approach of engaging with them? And then it's up to you. You may feel like, I think I've built enough rapport with this person, or we have a history where I don't need to explain to them what I'm doing, or I can engage with them. And if I notice they're becoming suspicious or uncomfortable or inquisitive, then I'll address it and say, this is what I'm doing. So it's completely up to you. Here's the other thing too, is the consent goes both ways. You don't have to engage with people in this manner, by the way. You may say, I'd rather just them go on their merry way, and I can't deal with it personally. I've got too much going on in my life. That's fine. Don't ever let somebody coerce you into a conversation, and please don't ever coerce somebody into a conversation as well. Have you come across people who claim to value truth but believe there are other ways of knowing beyond evidence that everyone can agree on? For example, that they have no doubt that they've been contacted with their God. Right. So you'll be amazed at the reasons and the methods people will give for thinking that things are true. A lot of people will say, I know it's true because this story is old. The older the story or the older the narrative, the more sure we are, the more sure that we can be that this is true, because there's no way a false narrative would have been passed along dutifully for so many generations. So you sometimes get that. A lot of the times the reasons that people have or the methods that they're using to be able to say that they have a good reason, they think it's good, but it's the act of exploring how they determine that it's a good, reliable method for weighting their reasons. It's the act of engaging with them in questions that helps them reveal whether it's good or not. That's the other thing too, is just like I don't want people to convince me, I want to understand how they became convinced. I also want them to hold themselves to their own standard. You're not living up to my standard. Why do you think these reasons match your own standard? Is this a good enough reason for thinking that this claim is true to a high degree of confidence? And then leaving them alone to process that. Very good question, by the way. Thanks, John. Can street epistemology be used in business? Yes. How do we get the culture of Socratic idea testing to spread beyond the streets and into private and public institutions and other walks of life? Yeah, I think Andy has hit on something that we're starting to recognize, that showing one-off conversations on YouTube where it's primarily about religion or supernatural beliefs or politics, because there's hundreds of videos where we're using it on those topics. In fact, I was just talking to Jeremy about it. Like it's nice to know how to have a one-on-one conversation, but how do we ramp this up? How do we work this into the culture? And I think the first step to this is standardizing SE to a certain degree, drawing some guidelines. Like if you have rapport and you've explored their epistemology, you've probably done SE. But then again, if you've built rapport and you've identified their claim and you've identified their level of confidence, and then like their phone rang and they had to go, you probably still had a good talk. Like you could still have good talks, but the best use of our time, I think, going forward is to develop tools that we can get into the hands of people who want to bring these tools into government and academia and businesses. I would love to see an army of consultants going and knocking on businesses' doors and saying, are you having any trouble in your HR departments? Would you like to have some tools on conflict resolution? Are your CEO struggling with some big decision? This could be a really useful tool. In fact, there's a couple of people. There's one fellow in Australia who's literally doing this. He's teaching SE along with other critical thinking tools to business people. He's giving them these tools. I think that SE has always been, not always, but it grew out of atheist activism. But we realized early on that it shouldn't stay there. It needs to broaden out, and working into the culture and through those other means, I think, is the way to go. So yeah, absolutely. Wonderful question.
I think we got time for one more question, Anthony.
Darn it. Okay, let me
take your pick. And so some of these, if we can't get to all of them, we can of course follow up next week's session.
Oh, there's so many good questions here. I do. Okay. I'm scanning them for the best one. Oh, by the way, I'll get I think there's a way to get a text of this chat. I'll download this before I close the window out, and then I'll answer these questions maybe as a review video or something. So I guess I'll go with, do you consider yourself to be toward the extrovert end of the scale? No, I find myself more as an introvert. I actually hate public speaking, although I've done so many of these, like, and I love SE and I know it really well. Like I'm not nervous at all doing this, but even like stopping people on the street, like when I first started doing it to initiate talks to get them for my channel, it was uncomfortable. And even if I needed to go out tomorrow and start talks, I'd probably still be uncomfortable doing it. But when you realize that people generally haven't really given their thoughts much thought, and they're almost literally doing all of the work, I'm listening to them and then thinking of good questions to ask them, and they're processing it. It kind of takes the pressure off of it. But I have noticed that people seemingly, this would be an interesting study, is who's attracted to SE. My sense is that a lot of introverts might see the value in this, maybe more than extroverts. I don't know. But it definitely, I think, has helped improve my conversational style. and it's totally taken the pressure off of me. Like I used to be a really anxious, nervous kid with tics and everything. And that's probably changed a lot just because of growing and maturing. But learning SE has really profoundly changed myself. Like I don't get nervous. I still don't like going to weddings and having to chit chat with people, like that stuff. But get me in a room with a couple people and I have a good old time. All right. Darn it. There's so many other questions, but I'll do a dump of the questions and then I'll try to answer them in some other way. But thank you very much for all your questions. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Anthony. That was awesome.